General Mick, retired Australian Major General, military strategist, author, supporter and friend of Ukraine, joining me now. Thank you for being with me, General Ryan. Welcome.
It's great to see you again, Natalie.
So the news that Donald Trump may allow Ukraine to produce Patriot air defense systems or interceptors under license has shaken Ukraine and made headlines in international media. What was your first impression yesterday? Could this become a truly historic decision for Ukraine's air defense, or does it still sound, too good to be true?
I think it's wonderful news if Trump follows through on it. I mean, you probably recall, as I do, a time when Americans were saying the Patriot missile system was too sophisticated for Ukrainians to use, and they learned to use it much quicker than everyone expected. Ukraine might surprise everyone and learn to build Patriot missiles much quicker than everyone expects as well.
Okay. Well, let's imagine, yes, so Trump, Marco Rubio, who was there, and all U.S. team actually follow through. What happens next in practical terms? I know that first bureaucracy, then technology transfer, then production itself. How long could this realistically take? Are we talking about years, as it was in Japan, or could, this wartime in Ukraine compress a process that normally takes much longer?
Well, it's still going to take time. It won't take as long as it did in Japan, for example, but I think wartime pressure will accelerate the process. That said, it's still going to take months and months. We may not see Ukrainian-built Patriot missiles in 2026, but we may well see them in 2027. The issue remains, to fill that gap, Ukraine still needs Patriot missiles from somewhere.
Yes, General Ryan, you said 2027. I thought it's going to be like 10 years from now. As long as I was reading, the article about Poland, who wants also to produce Patriot systems. I mean, I thought it's like 9-10 years.
I don't think it'll be that fast. And unlike pretty much every other country on earth, Ukraine has a compelling reason to do this as fast as possible, to protect its people from the nightly barrages of Russian ballistic and cruise missiles that are murdering Ukrainian citizens. So I think it'll be a faster process, but I don't think it will be an overnight one.
Well, of course. But, as you said, everything is great, but there is a huge but. We don't know whether it will all become reality, actually. Well, because with Donald Trump, it's always unpredictable. And Ukraine is facing a missile shortage now, not in several years. How should we separate the political value of this decision with the Patriot systems and license from its real military value in the next 6 or 12 months? And where can we find, General Ryan, the air defense for us?
Well, I think Trump has an incentive to follow through on this promise that he's made, and that is that it will be lucrative for American businesses. I mean, the license to produce these things won't be free. Someone will pay for that, and that is good business for America. It also becomes an alternate source of Patriot missiles for America and its allies, and it needs more production. So that's also a net good for America. So I think it's more likely than not that Trump's promise will come to fruition. It's just a matter of time. And as you note, somewhere, Ukraine has to find replacement Patriot missiles for the stocks that have been run down, the stocks that have been used in Iran, and countries like Germany and elsewhere are going to have to provide these missiles.
But will they?
Well, it's hard to say. We didn't see anything at the NATO summit along these lines, which would have been a perfect opportunity for them to make such an announcement. So it makes me wonder, well, how many of these Patriot missiles are actually left in the stocks of countries like Germany?
Yeah, absolutely. But given the current state of relations between the United States and NATO itself, how realistic is this, the whole process between them? How do you assess NATO unity right now, especially with the U.S. decisions on redeployment and withdrawal of American troops, and with the broader political, this tension inside the alliance?
Well, I think the NATO summit in Ankara went as well as could be hoped. I mean, all participants, including the United States, were able to agree on the Ankara Declaration, as it's being titled, about NATO unity. Trump was talking about NATO unity, although in the same breath he was criticising many European countries for their lack of support for America's operations in Iran. So, I think NATO's in about as good a shape as we could expect it to be. And I think those who have been predicting the death of NATO have probably been proved wrong, at least in the short term.
Yeah, actually, well, I had a good expectations about this year, 2026 NATO summit, but I think it was better than this. The moment when American president said about that, the bird whispered to me about the Patriot's license and systems to Ukraine, that we're going to give it to you. Oh, I was listening that quote for three times in a row because I could not believe. And not only that one, we have a lot of bilateral contracts, with a lot of countries there. So how do you assess overall the NATO summit for Ukraine?
Oh, I think it went pretty well for Ukraine. President Zelensky was there. He gave a couple of really good speeches. He had a lot of bilateral meetings with different European leaders. He made very interesting comment about how Ukraine's strategic strike is removing Russia's rear capacity. And there was some pretty important announcements from Europe, about 70 billion euros in support for Ukraine, as well as announcements from NATO countries about increases in defence spending. So overall, I think it was a successful summit. Given where we've been in the last 18 months, it's certainly better than we might have expected 12 months ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course, we were not expecting the invitation to NATO, of course. But other than that, everything went, I think, very great. So let's talk, General Ryan, about the idea of a sky shield for Ukraine. The concept is that NATO could protect a part of Ukrainian airspace by intercepting missiles and drones that are flying toward NATO countries. Do you see this as a realistic and technologically feasible? And do you expect this issue to be discussed further after the summit?
Well, I think technologically it's feasible, just depending on where they site the interceptor launch sites and the sensors. And it would make a degree of common sense for European nations to push their air defence envelope forward if Russia is going to continue to send drones over Europe. So having air defence systems along the Ukrainian and Belarusian border with very clear statements of intent about what they would intercept makes sense, but getting all European allies in NATO to agree to that will probably be the main sticking point.
And since we're talking about NATO, I still want to add another more question about Ukrainian membership. I said that we didn't expect that, obviously, but still, how do you expect real movement towards NATO membership in the coming years? Or is the alliance still politically afraid of that decision?
Well, there's certainly been no talk about it over the last year or two. It certainly had momentum a couple of years ago. I think as an issue, it's one that is not on the table at this point in time. It's not off the table for all time, but I think at this point in time, Ukraine will need to win the war against Russia before NATO looks at inviting it in. At this point, I don't see serious discussion about Ukraine joining NATO in the next 12 months.
Yes. And Russia was striking Ukrainian cities before and during NATO summit in Ankara. Ballistic missiles, there was a fast drones in Kyiv and not only. And all of that was to residential districts. What does that tell you? Is this Russia's way of speaking to the alliance when it has no political seat at the table anymore? Like, look, Ukraine still does not have enough air defense, and we know it. What was that message for, other than just killing Ukrainians every night?
Well, Well, certainly killing Ukrainians every night is part of Putin's strategy, but the other part of attacking Ukrainian cities, particularly during the Ankara summit, is to say to NATO, we're not afraid of you. Now, the reality is Putin is very afraid of NATO because he's railed against its expansion for his entire time in office. And he's talked about how NATO is at war with Russia. He is afraid of NATO, but he has to put up a good front. So it looks like to the Russian people that he's not afraid of them and he'll defend his country against any NATO aggression, which is very, very unlikely.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know that Ukraine couldn't intercept a wave of that ballistic missiles just a few days ago on July 6th. And do you think what is the most likely explanation? The air defense? And or these missiles being produced so quickly in Russia, ballistic missiles. So it's about quantity, not quality. That's why they are just hitting, they have no right direction, I would say, I don't know.
Well, the thing with ballistic missiles in particular is they are the most difficult target to track and to intercept, even with the world's best air defence system, which Ukraine has constructed over the last 4.5 years. Ballistic missiles are the most difficult target, and only a couple of systems like the Patriot are capable of bringing them down. So this says to us, firstly, Ukraine will work very hard to produce Patriot interceptors as quickly as possible. It will work very hard to get new Patriot missiles from other countries. And third, it is obviously working on other initiatives to build its own ballistic missile interceptors indigenously. How that goes remains to be seen.
Yeah, John Ryan, because I was reading the explanation of military experts. They were saying also that Russia is producing such a large numbers of these ballistic missiles, so they are not precise enough. Partially because Russia wants to hit the targets they were hitting, residential sleeping areas, but at the same time, those rockets are not precise enough.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly improved their precision over time. The Russians are not stupid. They do learn from each of their attacks. The real problem is they have stepped up the number of ballistic missiles they're using in the last couple of months, and they're just a very, very difficult target to intercept. You can't bring down a ballistic missile with a $5,000 interceptor drone, unfortunately. It takes far more sophisticated technology to track and to intercept these things, and that's what Ukraine is short of at the moment, unfortunately.
As you already mentioned that Ukraine is now hitting deeper and deeper inside Russia, all these refineries, oil infrastructure, logistics, military production. At the same time, as we're discussing, Russia answers with hitting Ukrainian cities, killing just an innocent people, kids that are sleeping at night. How should the West understand this asymmetry? And Ukraine targets, the machinery of Russia's war. Russia targets people in their beds.
Well, what Ukraine has done has built a capability to reach deep inside Russia, not just to hurt its military, but to hurt the industry that provides the support to the military over time, and to hurt the industries that provide the money that funds Putin's war. These are the two strategic and most important targets that Ukrainian long-range strike capabilities are targeting at the moment. They're not targeting cities, they're not targeting civilians like Russia is. So not only is it degrading Russia's warfighting capacity, it's making sure Ukraine retains the high ground in how it fights this war, which also helps them retain Western support.
And President Zelensky recently said that Ukraine is working on drones with a range of more than 3,000 kilometers. If that capability becomes systematic, what changes militarily? Does it mean that Russia's deep air is no longer really area?
Well, it means it doesn't have one anymore. It doesn't have any strategic depth. And drones with that range will be able to reach out to just about any of Russia's long-range bomber bases. And as we know, these are the bombers that launch the most dangerous cruise missiles at Ukraine. They've been moved far to the east. to protect them from Russian drone strikes within about 1,000 kilometres of Ukraine. So it will have a big impact on Russian bomber fleets, but it'll also have an impact on locations that might be in the far north of Russia that are also involved in energy extraction and production.
You know, right now I'm reading the article from General Valery Zaluzhny. He's the ambassador of Ukraine right now in the UK. And he is saying that we're becoming too optimistic with this deep strike of Ukraine inside Russia, all this heating, all these oil refineries, etc., that it's just in a short term, okay, this is a temporary success, but it's not gonna change a lot of things and not put Russia on its knees. And he said it's very sad that a lot of experts do not understand that. What is your take on that?
No, I think he's right. I think the message here is that Russia is losing, but it hasn't lost. We should recall when he was Commander-in-Chief, there was a huge amount of exuberance in the back half of 2022 with the offensives in Kharkiv and in Kherson. And then in 2023, we saw the failed counter-offensive. He's lived through this before. He understands that you can't take your boot off the throat of the Russians until they are beaten. That is not the case yet. And I think it's a very useful caution that Ambassador Zaluzhny has offered.
And speaking about Russia's oil refining sector that is already under serious pressure, LNG could become another vulnerable sector, especially after the EU's full LNG restrictions take effect in 2027. From a military point of view, is it more effective to strike huge strategic facilities or heat the logistics that make the whole sector work?
I think it's important to strike the ones that bring in the most foreign income for Russia and the ones that, are the most expensive and take the longest time to replace. So, Ukrainian targeteers in lots of places around Ukraine are probably looking at a very complex set of decisions that go into which ones they target. Of course, other countries that export LNG would be very happy for Russian supplies to be taken off the world market.
And at the same time, Ukraine's medium-range strike campaign is already making Russia logistics in occupied Crimea more and more difficult. And from your perspective, General Ryan, can Ukraine systematically raise the cost of holding Crimea to the point where it becomes more of a military and logistical burden for Moscow than an advantage they had?
Well, certainly the operations over and around Crimea and the Black Sea are isolating Russian forces there and making them much more difficult for them to use Crimea as a base for supporting Russian forces in southern Ukraine. I don't, however, see the Russians giving up on Crimea without any kind of significant fight. It is a very high priority territory that Putin wanted in 2014 and Putin wants to keep now. It's part of the reason why the Kerch Bridge was built and built so quickly. So I think the mid-range strike is important. It is seeing success, but taking Crimea back for Ukraine will take more than just this mid-range strike campaign.
Well, they are not leaving Russia. They are not leaving Crimea, but yet, so far. We'll see. General Ryan, in your recent new report, but not the one you published today, just a previous one, you argue that Western militaries have had years of open evidence from Ukraine, but are still failing to learn and adapt fast enough. What is the single most dangerous lesson NATO has still not absorbed from this Russia's war in Ukraine?
I think the most dangerous thing we haven't learned is that large wars are possible in Europe and in the Pacific in the 21st century. This was something that before 2022, most European leaders did not believe, and there's still too many European leaders and leaders in my region, including my own country, who refuse to invest in the defence spending that is necessary to deter the kind of aggression that Russia, China, Iran and North Korea might use to involve us in even bigger wars in the future.
You know, I was recently reading the article oh my God, I don't remember the name of the media outlet, where Anne Applebaum was writing. She's an American journalist and historian. And she was still insisting of a Korean scenario for Ukraine and Russia. And she was saying that Russia wants to end the war, but they just do not know how. But looking at the recent attacks on Ukraine, especially at Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, it doesn't seem so.
No, it doesn't seem like they do. I'm sure if you're a Russian soldier on the front line, and you probably do want the war to end because you're very likely to die at the hands of a Ukrainian drone. But Putin doesn't want the war to end unless it's under the conditions that he set down in 2022 before he began this war, which is the total subjugation of Ukraine. So he doesn't want this war to end without total control of Ukraine. So, I think we need to be very careful about projecting what the Russians want. At the end of the day, we have to help Ukraine win this war.
Yeah, you're right. And, finally, General Ryan, where is the real pressure point on Russia now? Is it the front line, or Russian oil refining, air defense exhaustion, as they doing to us, long-range Ukrainian strikes, or the fact that all these problems are, beginning to overlap at the same time?
I think there's no single point, and what Ukraine has developed this year is an integrated approach where it puts pressure on the front line, in the middle range strike, in strategic strike, in diplomacy, and in information operations. So it envelops Russia at every single level like a giant anaconda and just puts the squeeze on them and continues to increase the pressure over time.
General Ryan, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. It's a pleasure to talk to you.